lies and smears and slander.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Want to hear an amazing story? It has the benefit of being both true and illuminating. Here it is. In 1851, a man called Samuel Cartwright came up with a fairly sophisticated scientific explanation for why so many slaves were running away from plantations in the American South. These fugitive slaves, Cartwright explained, were suffering from a medical disorder. It was called drapetomania. It was a syndrome characterized by an uncontrollable or insane impulsion to wander. So that was the problem. It wasn't they disliked being enslaved or yearned for freedom and basic humanity. No. The problem, according to Samuel Cartwright, was that black people as a group were inherently defective. They were drapetomaniacs. They were always running away. That's what he said. 107 years later, it is embarrassing to repeat something this stupid out loud. It's so obviously insane. But here's what you should know. Drapetomania was taken very seriously at the time, and so was Samuel Cartwright. Cartwright was not a fringe character at all. He was a nationally prominent physician, a former high-ranking Army officer from Fairfax, Virginia. He went to Penn Medical School. Samuel Cartwright was a credentialed man of science who commanded the respect of the country.
Oh, yes.
50 years after the Civil War, one of this nation's leading medical dictionaries continued to maintain an entry for drapetomania. So in retrospect, of course, we would call Samuel Cartwright a bigot, which he undoubtedly was. But he was also more than that. Cartwright was a practitioner of something called scientific racism. Scientific racism is deeper than simple prejudice. It is the use of science to justify the dominance of one group over another group. Scientific racism has a history as long as science, simply because the impulse to dominate is inherent to human nature. So it's not really about color, though it's called racism. Instead, it's about power.
Bro.
Martin Luther King wrote eloquently about this. So did Dr. Seuss, by the way. You might want to take a look at what they wrote, assuming you can still buy their books. The point is, scientific racism never actually went away. It's still with us. No one talks about drapetomania anymore. Instead, our medical professionals and law professors and military leaders and politicians and cable news hosts have identified a new disorder they claim explains everything bad. It's called whiteness. In the universities, it has become an article of faith that were it not for the indelible stain of whiteness, America could be a utopia. Only whiteness stands in the way. That's why we must abolish it. As Harvard Magazine put it, abolish the white race. Only then can we be happy. Lots of people seem to believe this. They're not all bad people, just as not everyone who believed in Samuel Cartwright in the 1850s was evil. Some people are just gullible. They're looking for meaning in their lives. If you hand them a unified theory of everything, some percentage of them are going to buy it wholesale. There were nice people at Jonestown in Guyana. They just didn't know any better.
Wow.
It's their leaders that you wonder about. They do know better, or they should. And when they talk about this new iteration of scientific racism, when they talk about whiteness, they sound very much like old-fashioned bigots. Take this guy, for example. His name is Eric Michael Dyson. He's a tenured professor at some stupid college or other. He lives in a rich, almost exclusively white neighborhood. He goes on television a lot.
Yeah. Okay.
Watch him as he talks about race and ask yourself, honestly, if he sounds any different at all from, say, Bull Connor or David Duke. He doesn't. Only the colors have changed. Here he is.
And speaking about, the maggots, I'm sorry, the MAGA, that is so corrosive in this, political moment. And we have stood by to see mediocre, mealy-mouthed, snowflake white men who are incapable of taking critique, who are willing to dole out infamous repudiations of the humanity of the other, and yet they call us snowflakes, and they are the biggest flakes of snow to hit the earth. They are incapable of criticism. They are incapable of tolerating difference. They're scared of, oh my God, critical race theory is going to kill your mother. And they don't even know. They're not critical. They have no race, and they don't understand theory.
Huh?
White men, they're the problem. You hear that so often, that you don't pause to consider what a change this is. It used to be only a few years ago that the one thing you couldn't do in America was attack people in public on the basis of their race. I don't like that group because of their skin color. Let's hurt them. You couldn't say that. It was the one unacceptable thing, and for very good reason. You cannot maintain a multiracial democracy unless people of every color have exactly the same rights and responsibilities under the law and are considered of precisely the same moral value under God. You have to have that. That's the most basic prerequisite for a multiracial democracy. All lives have to matter, or it cannot work. It's pretty clear that our leadership class, for whatever reason, doesn't want it to work. Obviously, they don't. Look at what they're doing. When you hear people ascribe blood guilt to a specific racial group, when you hear them talk about the sin of whiteness, what you're watching is the death of our future as a country. We can't live in a nation of warring tribes. We know very well what that looks like because it's the history of the world.
Maybe.
It's miserable and vicious and bloody. We can't allow that. Most Americans of all colors on some level understand this. They don't always have the words to articulate it, but they know it. When their kids come home from school with assignments that suggest that all races are not in fact equal, that some races are guilty and some are innocent, that some groups are oppressors inherently and others are inherently oppressed. In the universities, this is called critical race theory, so that's the term that most people go with. Critical race theory. That's what we so often debate on television. That's the clip we just showed you. But critical race theory is an inaccurate way to describe what's happening. Like so much academic jargon, the phrase critical race theory doesn't mean anything. It obscures rather than illuminates. It is designed that way. It is designed to confuse you. What's happening in our schools and our military and our government is both simpler and easier to recognize than that. It's not critical race theory. It's racism. Not neo-racism or reverse racism. Those are meaningless terms. It is race hate. It is peddled by the people in charge in the hope that it will make them more powerful. That's all it is. We haven't said that often enough or clearly enough. And because we haven't, because we've been tied up in some pointless debate about a concept that nobody can actually define, the race hate, and that's what it is, has oozed from the universities and it has infected the entire country, including at the very highest levels. Mark Milley is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He didn't get that job because he's brilliant or because he's brave or because the people who know him respect him. He is not, and they definitely don't. Milley got the job because he is obsequious. He knows who to suck up to, and he's more than happy to do it. Feed him a script, and he will read it. Here's Milley yesterday, the man in charge of this nation's weapons, explaining that he's working to understand a concept called white rage.
I do think it's important, actually, for those of us in uniform to be open-minded and be widely read. And the United States Military Academy is a university. And it is important that we train and we understand. And I want to understand white rage, and I'm white, and I want to understand it. So what is it that caused thousands of people to assault this building and try to overturn the Constitution of the United States of America? What caused that? I want to find that out. I want to maintain an open mind here, and I do want to analyze it. It's important that we understand that because our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Guardians, they come from the American people. So it is important that the leaders, now and in the future, do understand it.
Hard to believe that man wears a uniform. He's that unimpressive. Notice he never defined white rage, and we should know what it is. What is white rage? Well, like drapetomania, it's one of those diseases that only affect people with certain melanin levels. It's a race-specific illness. That's what Mark Milley has learned from reading about it. That's why he's making his soldiers read about it too. They need to know. Watch.
I've read Mao Zedong. I've read Karl Marx. I've read Lenin. That doesn't make me a communist. So what is wrong with understanding, having some situational understanding about the country for which we are here to defend? And I personally find it offensive that we are accusing the United States military, our general officers, our commissioned, non-commissioned officers, of being, quote, woke.
He's not just a pig, he's stupid. So Mark Milley reads Mao to understand Maoism. He reads communist to understand communism. But it's interesting that he doesn't read white supremacists to understand white supremacy. Why not go to the source? Well, because Mark Milley would be fired instantly if he read those books, and getting fired is the one thing he doesn't want. So he reads about white rage as if it's totally real. It's a medical condition.
Oh, yes.
And by the way, since it's a medical condition, at what age can you catch white rage, by the way? Most of us assumed that our 2-year-olds were just teething. Now we know it's their whiteness that's making them so angry. Thanks, Mark Milley. We appreciate your contribution to our generation's scientific racism. By the way, have you read anything recently about winning wars? Apparently not.
Yeah. Okay.
We could go on and on and on. Pundit after senator, after professor, after general, each one of them spewing race hate. Whiteness! White rage! Dressed up as some new academic theory. We certainly have the tape. We'll spare you because you've seen it. It's everywhere. The question is, and this is the question that we should be meditating on day in and day out, is how do we get out of this vortex, this cycle, before it's too late?
Oh, boy.
How do we save this country before we become Rwanda? What should we be teaching our children so they can live in the country that you want to live in? A country full of many different kinds of people, many different, but who actually like each other, who are happy to work together, who are united ultimately by the core fact, which is they're all Americans. That is the question.
Wow.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson. Tonight, if you lived in this country 15 years ago and you've got a good memory, you may remember the creation of something called the National Security Division at the Department of Justice. It was created back in 2005 when they re-upped the Patriot Act. Now, the point of the National Security Division, we were told at the time, was to conduct, quote, counterterrorism and counterespionage operations against foreign adversaries. This was the big stuff. Mostly it was Islamic terror, which was the primary threat of that time. But these were also the people in charge of busting Chinese spies who were trying to steal our nuclear secrets, stopping suicide bombers and hijackings. Not small stuff, crimes that threaten the nation. That was then. Then Joe Biden became president in January, and the entire mission of the United States government changed and turned inward against you.
A what?
A few days ago, the Department of Justice, under the radical Attorney General Merrick Garland, announced that the National Security Division has a new domestic mission. According to Garland, effective immediately, the National Security Division is handling the investigation of, quote, harassment, intimidation, and threats of violence against school board members, teachers, and workers in our nation's public schools, end quote. What? So the question is, who is threatening these teachers and school board members? Is it Al-Qaeda? Is it the Russian government? Is it ISIS-K? No. It's parents. Parents are angry about what's happening in schools. Why are they angry? Well, take a close look at the people Joe Biden has nominated to senior leadership positions in the Department of Education. Take a look at YouTube videos, while they still exist, of some of the school board meetings across the country over the past year. And you will know exactly why parents are mad. Parents who believe in things like biological sex, who oppose racial hierarchies imposed in pre-kindergarten classrooms, teaching kids to hate their parents. Those are the threat, according to the Biden administration. You'll notice if you look closely that nowhere in Merrick Garland's recent order or the DOJ's press release is any explanation of these, quote, threats of violence. What threats of violence? Has violence occurred at school board meetings? No. Look closer and you'll find this line, quote, the Justice Department will also create specialized training and guidance that will help school board members understand the type of behavior that constitutes threats. Oh. So it's a propaganda operation funded by you out of the Department of so-called Justice.
Huh, maybe.
Designed to tell teachers and school board members that when parents complain, it's domestic terrorism. It's not the First Amendment in progress. It's not your constituents voicing legitimate complaints. It's effectively a foreign adversary trying to kill you. The Biden administration is trying to convince school board members using the Department of Justice that they are in physical danger from parents. And those parents are national security threats. Once again, nothing like this has ever happened in this country. This is an utter perversion of the mission and the power of the United States Department of Justice. It is almost impossible to overstate how sinister and crazy this is. We almost never play the equivalence game because it's tiresome, but in this case, it's hard to resist. Imagine if Donald Trump's DOJ designated, say, CNN anchors as domestic terrorists, put it in writing, and then told men with guns to enforce the law. How would that go over? We, for one, would be outraged by that. All decent Americans would. And it would, in fact, be less of a stretch than this order. A lot of CNN anchors made excuses for violence during the riots last year. But the media aren't upset about this. When powerless suburban parents resist having nihilistic ruling class ideologies imposed by force on their children, our media seem to believe it is perfectly fine to designate them terrorists and threaten them with firearms.
In a version of America where school board meetings have become the new culture war battlegrounds, with children caught in the crosshairs, sometimes literally and sometimes figuratively.
Right now, everyone from the Proud Boys to the Oath Keepers to QAnon influencers are trying to encourage their members, their followers, their maniacs to show up at school board hearings.
Some behavior is so bad, it's being compared to domestic terrorism.
This becomes a security crisis, in a sense, for the nation.
How one Republican senator is pretending school board harassment and intimidation aren't off the charts.
Similar tactics to what happened on January 6th that now are being turned against school boards nationwide in a trend that's really disturbing and sinister.
Conservatives manufactured outrage over masks and history lessons, took our school boards hostage like a bunch of screaming maniacs.
So the federal government has designated American parents who are unhappy with the education their children are receiving as domestic terrorists, and the media are defending it. This is so shameful, it's hard to describe. The entire point of a free press is to protect the weak from the strong. But as usual, and more flagrantly every day, our media does exactly the opposite. They slobber over billionaires, they defend the powerful, they call you a bigot if you challenge George Soros. And on the other hand, they clap like seals as working class people go to jail for thought crimes.
Yeah. Okay.
They're trying to pretend that's not what they're doing, that they're not sucking up to power, that they're not the Praetorian Guard for the Biden administration, but they are. They're telling you this is about domestic terrorism. They're repeating Merrick Garland's own words. It has nothing to do with freedom of speech. On MSNBC this week, the daughter of a United States Senator, that would be Robert Menendez of New Jersey, one of the Biden administration's closest allies in the Senate.
Oh, boy.
Promised that she would air definitive proof that parents who dare to challenge the orthodoxies of the Joe Biden administration are in fact a grave threat to national security. She would show us proof that the National Security Division needs to investigate these parents, treat them like criminals, for daring to speak up at their own school board meetings before members of the school board they elected to run schools they pay for that educate their children. Here's the evidence she presented.
Frank, I want to play some more sound of these school board meetings so we can get a sense of just how out of control some of them are getting. Take a listen.
Don't put masks on our kids anymore, because I'm telling you what, I'm a mom who's fearless, and I will come after you.
You're allowing child abuse. You're allowing child abuse. You're allowing child abuse. You're allowing child abuse.
Yes.
So, Frank, things have become so scary at these meetings that the organization representing school boards across the country is asking the federal government to help, arguing that the classification of these actions could be the equivalent to a form of domestic terrorism.
So mothers stand up before a school board, which is their constitutional right, in fact, their duty as parents.
What?
To say that they believe, based on a lot of scientific evidence, that their children are being hurt by a policy that makes no sense. Imagine looking at that tape and blaming the moms and suggesting that their behavior is, quote, scary and they're terrorists and the FBI should show up at their house and hassle them like they're Al-Qaeda or ISIS-K, assuming that even exists.
Huh, maybe.
What did they say? Don't put masks on our kids anymore. It's child abuse. Well, actually, that's true. And anyone who's looked at the data knows that it's true. Belgian pediatricians, for example, and the Belgian Academy for Medicine, not a third world country, just issued this assessment of masks in school. Here it is, quote, testing children, imposing mouth masks and quarantines go against the principle of first do no harm, which is included in the Hippocratic Oath that doctors took. These drastic actions do much more damage to the children in the short and long term than going through the COVID infection itself.
We have people that are stupid.